This is a Relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
In just a second, Max Fawcett, he's just hit publish on a new piece at Canada's National Observer. That's where he's the lead columnist. He says, he says that Danielle Smith isn't governing, Alberta's premier not governing for the majority of Albertans. We'll get him to argue the case. A lot of people are going to be paying attention to this as, political watchers prepare for that fall session at the Alberta legislature to begin, and probably more notably for the United Conservative Party's AGM in the city of Red Deer, halfway between Calgary and Edmonton, right at the beginning of November, a leadership review that may have the premier focused more than the legislative session itself. Now, none of her team would ever acknowledge that. None of her team would ever admit that. But when it comes to the history of conservative premiers in Alberta, you got to take a look at who's run them out of office and who's been able to sustain their tenures. And the leadership reviews have factored in more heavily than general elections themselves. Plus, a story that's been developing, influencers in Canada and the United States, some right-wing political commentators on the payroll, on Russia's payroll. What does this all mean? We got to ask Max about that. Plus, we'll follow up on this story, the Green Line out of Calgary. You know, this big multi-billion-dollar transit project. The province has stepped in on this one, said basically the costs are out of control and we're taking it over. Erica Barudis and Cheryl Oates got into it on our most recent Real Talk Roundtable. That was our Real Talk episode on the 6th of September. You're looking for the episode titled, What Are Trudeau, Singh, and Danielle Smith Doing? They got into a healthy debate on the future of the Green Line, and of course we got to ask Max about that as well. This episode is proudly presented by Alberta's top real estate school. You'll find Rello online at rello.ca. That's RELO.ca, where better real estate training starts. You know, you got options if you want to start your real estate career. If you got to study for that exam and then you got to get licensed and then you want to start practicing. But there's really only one option if you want to do it right. Rello has high exam pass rates, winning webinar and tutorial content, plus flexible online learning. And they've got a team of experienced professionals that can help invest in your success so you hit the ground running. Now, we want to make sure that you're paying as little as possible when you get started, because we know that the cost crunch is on when you're launching a new business. That's why we're happy to tell you about the promo code Ryan100. Whether it's the Alberta commercial or the Alberta residential real estate bundle that you're investing in, that promo code Ryan100 will knock $100 off each of them, or both, at rello.ca. Max Fawcett is the lead columnist at Canada's National Observer, a good friend of this show. It had been a while since we talked to Max. We thought we better get him back on, especially as news is breaking across the country. It's good to see you again, my man. A happy Monday morning to you. What's the story over the course of the weekend in the international news cycle that you've been following most closely? What's captured your attention right now?
It's hard to sort of put your finger on just one thing. There's so much happening, just obviously because I'm a member of the media and this hits me a little closer to home. I have pointed out, I'm sure, it is not a secret on Twitter or elsewhere that, that there are people in the Canadian media ecosystem who have a habit of echoing Russian talking points. I never thought that it would come out as cleanly and plainly as it did in the DOJ charges of these American YouTube hosts and the deal that they apparently had done with members of RT. It was Russia Today, which is a Russian state-owned media company. I never thought that it would be quite so black and white, but there it was. And I think the question on a lot of people's minds here in Canada is who is involved on our side of the border outside of Lawrence Southern, who was sort of identified in the American proceedings, because Russia does not only stick its nose in America's business; they stick their nose in everyone's business. That's sort of part of their international strategy. They like to sow instability. They like to sow division. And a lot of the talking points that were identified in that DOJ list of charges are the same ones that we hear in Canada. So I am waiting to have more details about who exactly maybe has been involved in this. But I think it's a very safe bet that the number of people is greater than zero.
Let people know that we reached out to Lauren Southern a while ago and haven't received a response. I'd love for a chance to do an interview and ask about it. My guess is that she won't be doing it. Why is this, for people that are paying attention to this and they're casual news observers, and they might go, oh yeah, I subscribe to Lauren on YouTube, or I've watched some of her stuff. Why does this matter, Max?
Well, it matters because foreign interference in our democracy is a problem. And I think that's one of those rare issues where you have agreement among conservatives, liberals, New Democrats. Like we want to decide our own affairs. We want to make our own choices, and we want to vote in our own elections without having another country put their thumb on the scale. And Russia has always had this strategy of identifying, and this goes back to the 60s, the 50s, of identifying what they called useful idiots. And so those were people in the United States, in Europe, in Canada, who would be willing to carry their water, talk up their version of events for free, essentially, or for a very small amount of money. And they have been doing that, I think, ever since. And social media is just this amazing opportunity for them to take this strategy to the next level. They can confuse and anger so many people at such a low cost. And so, with this set of indictments, you see what they've done is given these YouTube companies, or this content company that uses YouTube to make videos, given these high profile content creators, Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, Lauren Southern, essentially funded them making videos that make Russia's point for it, whether it's about Ukraine, about the border in the United States, about immigration. Russia doesn't really take an ideological position. I mean, I think it clearly prefers Donald Trump because he's weak and foolish. But Russia's position broadly is just to sow chaos within democracies, to make democracy seem weak, to make democracy seem unstable, unreliable. That has always been their project, and social media has kind of kicked the door open for that.
We ran into some real talkers this weekend. We'll be talking a little bit later in the episode about this Jasper Wildfire Benefit Concert. But this one guy comes up to me and he's paying close attention to this debate, the debate that's looming, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump. I think a lot of people have been looking forward to see how this goes. And this guy says to me, I think Trump is just going to, I think you might be underestimating Kamala Harris. I don't know that he's going to eat her alive. Speaking of Trump, what are you expecting to see in the big debate?
I expect his usual sort of chaotic, World Wrestling Entertainment style routine. He's not going to prepare like policy talking points. He's not going to prepare for a substantive debate with Kamala Harris. He's going to try to bully her. He's going to try to, use his verbal style, which is just to string together nonsense in a very effective kind of unbroken stream. To confuse and distract. And look, I think if you come into this as a solid Democrat or a solid Republican, it's highly unlikely that anything that happens is going to change your mind. But there's always the possibility of having some sort of viral moment, viral clip, something that clarifies. And I don't think he appreciates what he's getting into. I think whether it's because he doesn't like Kamala Harris, because he doesn't respect her, or he just, is too high on his own supply. I don't think he understands that he's getting in there with a trained prosecutor, someone whose job before politics was and I think she may have some success there. She may well get him to say a thing that he doesn't want to say, and maybe that takes wind. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see. I do agree with you. I think actually, and I'm sure that, like, obviously you can have anecdotal evidence that I would be completely wrong on this, where people would say, no, a debate actually did change my mind, or there was a moment in a debate that sort of like altered the course of where my vote was going, more for the undecideds. But I'm not convinced really that the debates act as that they act as big mind changers. But it also depends on each election's dynamic and where the undecideds are, right? In this one, I don't get a sense like you watch what's happening, and sure, we watch from afar, we watch from a different land as we're watching the Americans get set to head to the polls beginning in November. But I haven't met a single person or heard a single person on the news going, I'm just not quite sure whether I'm going to vote for Donald or Kamala. It just doesn't seem to be sort of a wishy-washy, gray area, undecided type vibe.
Yeah, I think that's how we wish that people made up their minds in politics, that they would, if they were undecided, they would sit down in front of a debate and kind of have an open mind and listen for who they thought made a better case. it tends to be the case that undecided voters don't pay attention to anything about politics, or very sort of very glancingly, maybe they hear it from a friend of a friend or something, and they kind of make up their mind through far less rigorous and fact-oriented ways. It's much more vibes-oriented. And you've heard a lot of talk in this election about the power of vibes, and vibes really do move the needle on this stuff. I think a lot more than pointed exchanges during a debate. Political nerds like me wish it wasn't so, but that is the way that the undecided universe of voters tends to kind of land on whether they're going to vote and who they're going to vote for.
Let me just say, Horse Lake Ranch is making a fabulous point in the chat and says the debate knocked Joe out. They do matter. He's absolutely, well, he or she, whoever Horse Lake Ranch is, like the debate was the death knell for Joe Biden. So I'll eat my words on that one. It certainly mattered last time around.
They can. I mean, you remember, I was going to say you remember. Most people don't remember, but the debate in 1984 between John Turner and Brian Mulroney. I mean, Brian Mulroney delivered probably the greatest knockout blow in Canadian political history in that debate. That debate ended that election. So it can happen. It's the exception rather than the rule. For every one debate where you see one of those sort of gripping exchanges that turns the tide, there's probably 10 or 12 where nothing happens and nothing changes.
Yeah. Before we move on, I mean, you mentioned Trump. I wanted to jump in on Trump, but I don't want to move on from this Russia story too soon. What do you like when it comes to sort of the fallout from this? Obviously, this is the type of thing that'll put names on people's radar. People will look at online content. Maybe they've been following a YouTube channel, or they've heard of a certain political commentator, or they get a little suspicious for, some comments or some takes they've seen from certain commentators on social media. But bigger picture, what do you think the fallout from this should be? I mean, I don't know why I'm being hesitant to use the word consequence, but what would you like to see happen here?
Yeah, consequences is tricky because you have to be able to prove, the thing that they proved in the DOJ indictment is there was a paper trail, there was money exchanging hands, and that is where you can get people in a legal setting. You can't and shouldn't be able to attach legal consequences to people saying dumb things, or things where they got tricked, or things where they believe something that is probably not in the best interest of this country. That is sort of the nature of free expression, is you have the right to have a bad opinion. It's when money changes hands that the picture kind of shifts. And so if there are investigations underway here in Canada, and I suspect there are, that's what they're going to be looking for, is was there a financial relationship that sort of connected the transmission of these pro-Russia ideas and values to people potentially here in Canada. And again, I think it's important to kind of underscore the idea of a useful idiot. Russia's favorite strategy is not to pay people money. It's for them to do it for free. And there's a lot of people out there in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, on the left, on the right, who do it for free. And that's their favorite outcome. I think what's surprising is that they actually put money so transparently into one of these operations.
Travis in our chat says Rebel Media is doing so much baby shred. I'm curious to see how you might approach this with the notoriously litigious head of Rebel Media. No doubt, with all eyes on him, you've got kind of a demure smile on your face right now. How would you respond to Travis if he said that to you in the beer garden?
Look, I mean, if there's evidence that there's the paper trail and there's money, then by all means, the courts should proceed with that. But I think it's far more likely that whatever sort of Russia-friendly content that Rebel might be doing, they're doing it for free. They're the useful idiots, and I guess I leave it to your viewers to decide which is worse.
Yeah, no kidding. Obviously, I think Travis is having fun with that, but I mean, hey, crazier things have happened. Max, you've just published a piece like this morning at nationalobserver.com. If you're just joining us, Max Fawcett, our guest, that's where Max is lead columnist. The headline reads, Danielle Smith's war on Alberta has only just begun. War on Alberta. What do you mean?
Well, the striking thing about the Smith government has been the way at which it has kind of not even disguised the fact that it is, the needs of the few outweighing the needs of the many. She is governing in name and for a few thousand people who are members of her party over and above the best interests of millions of Albertans. And, you can look at that whether it's the, moving forward with an Alberta police force where, Albertans have said time and time again, no, thank you, we're not interested in this. And she's moving forward with it. You look at the Alberta pension plan. They've thrown millions of dollars. They've done town halls. They've really tried to massage the public opinion. The public is still very much not interested in this terrible, awful idea. And they haven't said they're going to drop it. I think it's very possible that they move forward with an Alberta pension plan as well. You look at the Green Line. It's hard to imagine how a government that, only won election in the last election by a few thousand votes in a few seats in Calgary would think it's a good idea to torch a project that directly benefits people in Calgary, and especially people in ridings that are pretty close, that were pretty close in the last election. How that's a winning strategy, I cannot figure, unless you realize she's not governing for them. She's not worried about the 2027 election. She's worried about the 2024 leadership vote, and everything else flows from that. If she gets to 2027, she'll worry about it then. But her policies and her choices really just seem heavily oriented towards getting through the next few months and to placate and please, this UCP membership, which is pretty far to the right. She has to do things on trans kids. She has to do things on, killing public transit. She has to do the pension plan stuff. It's all this red meat, just a diet of nothing but hard red meat. And time will tell whether it works. And then the problem here is, even if she survived leadership vote, the David Parkers of the world never sleep on this stuff. And so if she survives, she still has to be far more heavily oriented towards those small number of people in mostly rural parts of Alberta than she does the entire province. And I would ask her supporters, how would you feel if the NDP did this, or the Liberals, if the NDP governed exclusively for the best interests of union members or union executives? You would be up in arms, but that is exactly what is happening in Alberta right now.
Can we agree that, legislation on, like trans kids or pronouns in schools or puberty blockers, that kind of stuff is absolutely and completely different than pulling $1.5 billion from public transit from the Green Line in Calgary? Like, that doesn't, or maybe you can make the argument, but that doesn't strike me at first glance to be aimed at pleasing or placating the same group of people. I think that you can probably actually make a pretty good argument. And I'd love you to take us into the Green Line story and get your take on this. But at first assessment, it looks like the project cost has ballooned. I don't know if you want to say out of control, but it sure looks like it, from about $4.5 billion to about $6.2 billion. So it's up a lot. As I said on Friday's show, it's up 3 Rogers places in cost. They've cut the stops, the transit stops, by more than half. So I guess you could say it'll be less efficient or potentially used by fewer people. It'll be less convenient. To be sure. Devin Dreeshen, the transportation minister, kind of interesting because on August 1st, I think that everybody paying attention to the story knows that on August 1st, he confirmed that the funding was, in his words, 100% secure. The minister said that the Alberta government's in on this for, it's just over $1.5 billion. 6 weeks later, he's calling it a boondoggle and says they're out. So Calgary's mayor, short story, says we can't afford it anymore. So for all intents and purposes, at least for now, that project is done. But I guess what I'm saying is that I think that you can make a business bottom line argument for the province to say we're really concerned about this right now and we're going to take a second look. It looks different than the school pronoun stuff and puberty blockers. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Maybe I tried to shoehorn everything into one piece.
Well, whatever. We just want to have a real conversation about it, No.
I think you're right. I think the thing that struck me about the Green Line decision was that is not a thing that you would do, I don't think, if you're trying to win an election in 2027 that will be decided by Calgary, most likely decided by Calgary. It just seems wildly unpopular to me to be cutting the legs out from underneath a project that a lot of Calgarians, when you get outside the social media bubbles, really were looking forward to, and needed to get to work, to cut their commutes, to spend more time with their kids. And we can get into the details of that in a second, because believe me, the city is not without criticism in terms of how they handled it. But that just doesn't strike me as a strategy to win the next election. But you're right that the trans stuff, the Canada Pension Plan stuff, the Alberta Police Force stuff, that is much more sort of red meat flavored than maybe the Green Line, which does at least have the pretense of being about fiscal conservatism and fiscal stability.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think the vote is November 3rd, if I remember correctly. It's that weekend where the UCB members will be gathering in Red Deer, and she'll be able to point to some progress on some of the stuff, the school stuff for sure. And it's been interesting to see that public polling on that, it's not as unpopular as some people might try to spin it, as a matter of fact, with the general public. I know a lot of people are saying that that's for the David Parkers, and I think a big part of it is. But actually, when you look at the general public, where the general public is on it, it's not as polarizing an issue as you might think. But she doesn't exactly have a lot to stand on if they're looking for proof of performance on the Alberta Police Force stuff, on the Alberta Pension Plan stuff. It's all but stalled out. I can't remember the last time I heard Danielle Smith out of her own mouth talking about an Alberta pension plan. It's been quietly going away for quite some time.
But it hasn't gone away completely, right? Despite the fact that the public has made it abundantly clear, I think, that they are not interested in letting the UCP keep polishing this turd. They haven't dismissed it out of hand. There's a report that was apparently, the public consultation and the results of that were gathered. We haven't seen that. We don't know what it says, except that we know that if the government's not releasing it, it's not good for their position. Maybe she's keeping that in reserve for the next leadership vote. Who knows? Maybe there's a longer game here. I think your point is a good one. That yes, the trans stuff is not as unpopular as some people would imagine that it is, and I think maybe there's to some extent a bit of an overplaying of the hand by progressives there, just a tiny bit. But she hasn't delivered on the tax cut that she promised. That was the signal thing, the signal offer to middle of the road Albertans in the last election was this big tax cut. It's nowhere to be seen. She's going to be running a deficit, it sounds like, for the fiscal year that we're in, especially if oil prices stay where they are. So there's not a lot that this group can get super duper excited about, which is why I kind of feel like maybe they will give her a pass in this vote, but they're not going to remove the sword from over top her head. Like the sword of Damocles is still going to be hanging over this government for as long as it is dependent and sort of oriented around this membership.
I want to ask you about the momentum or lack of momentum. I want to sort of you take it in the direction you like. The introduction of Naheed Nenshi into this conversation. Obviously, the NDP leadership race had a lot of people talking about it. He wins it, like he dominates it, wins it with like 86% of the vote, but we haven't yet really truly seen him go head-to-head against Danielle Smith. He still won't be in the fall session. He doesn't have a seat in the legislature, so he's got his challenges there. We're going to ask Max about that in just a quick second, but first I want to tell you about a couple of things that are going on. This is our, Vine Arts. If I'm looking for a really fabulous but affordable wine, if I'm looking for craft beer that can just exactly nail that specific type of beer I'm trying to find, maybe it's like a sour, or maybe it's, a NEPA, or you guys know what I'm talking about. Some of the best beers that are being brewed in Alberta, you're going to find them at Vine Arts, and I love what they've done as well with their whiskeys, their tequilas. The curation is off the charts, and they're getting set to celebrate their first birthday in Edmonton. They've been down in Calgary for a while. I love their 17th Avenue location. But on 124th Street in Edmonton, right around 109th Ave, you'll find that new Vine Arts, and coming up on the 14th of September, that's Saturday from noon to 7, you're invited to join them there. A 15% off sale, which is great. Load up on wine, right? Prizes, tasty samples and snacks. Meet their team. It's going to be a great celebration. I love how they organize their wines. I've been telling you about this, not by region, but by taste profile. So it makes it easy to look brilliant if you're bringing a bottle to a barbecue. That's the first birthday at Vine Arts, coming up on Saturday the 14th on 124th Street. Find out more at vinearts.ca. If this is the time of year that you're looking to transform your living space, it could be maybe the entertainment center where the team gets together. Maybe it's your friends. Could be the family movie night. And you'd love to see an entertainment center installed, done by the best in the business. California Closets does that. They also do walk-in closets, beautiful garages, laundry rooms, boot rooms, you name it. Of course, it could be your imagination at work. It could be their design team working with you. They can do it on a budget, and nobody does it better. Plus, a lifetime guarantee. You can request that free consultation today at californiaclosets.ca. And a shout out to Athabasca University, all those of you that have just headed back to school this fall. A lot of you are doing it at Athabasca University, but it could have been fall, could have been winter, could have been spring, because you're the one plotting the course for your post-secondary journey. That's part of the Athabasca University Advantage. The AU Advantage includes that online education piece. The only commute is to your device. And of course, it makes it much more accessible. It makes it a lot more manageable for folks that are balancing real life with their career pursuit, with their education pursuit. Learn more about selecting your custom path by checking out their website. It's where you can apply as well at athabascau.ca. Hanging out with Canada's National Observer lead columnist Max Fawcett. Unless something dramatic happens over the next little bit, we're not expecting to see it. No by-elections really looming. We do have a vacated seat. Shannon Phillips is leaving in Lethbridge. By the way, catch Shannon and her new work colleagues. They're going to be joining us on the 18th of September on a special Real Talk roundtable right here. She'll talk to us about what she's doing next and why she's doing it the way she is. I'm not sure if you heard about it, Max, but Shannon's joining forces. They'll have an advocacy firm, public advocacy, a lobby firm. Essentially, it's going to be on the masthead. It's a prominent conservative, a prominent liberal, and a prominent NDPer, and I kind of like that style. I would be curious to see what their clients will look like coming up. But Nenshi has told us directly from the horse's mouth that he will not seek a seat in Lethbridge. Doesn't feel like that's the right fit. Are you surprised that the NDP are going to head into the fall session at the Alberta Legislature without their leader representing a riding?
No, not really. In part because Lethbridge and Nenshi running down there presents a bunch of risks that they don't really need to take right now. The election's not till 2027. He needs a seat in Calgary. I think that's pretty clear. And in part because, one of the golden rules of I think, politics and a number of other things is if your opponent is in the process of injuring themselves, the UCP this fall, it's been clear as day since he was elected leader, the entire agenda is going to be around the leadership vote in Red Deer. And so, having him run for a seat in the legislature, having that kind of distract or pull political oxygen away from the tire fire that is that convention and the leadership vote doesn't make any sense for the NDP. So they're going to let that process play itself out. And then I'm sure after that, he will get to work in terms of finding the best seat for him from which to be the leader of the official opposition.
Do you have a forecast on what you think is going to happen in Calgary? What'll develop in Calgary? I know this gets a little bit awkward because you start invoking actual people's real names publicly, but do you have a theory on what might unfold in Calgary ultimately to get Nenshi into the ledge?
I mean, the one that everyone talks about, and it's the obvious fit is Joe Ceci in Calgary Buffalo. I think I don't know if Joe wants to keep going or if he wants to step aside, and then that's obviously conversations that they're having. Almost anywhere that he would run in Calgary would be sort of an NDP safe seat. And, there's some logic in putting him in a seat that's not so safe, so as to kind of protect it. But I think he will have some options when it comes to that. And I don't think we're going to have to wait that long to find out where he is ultimately going to try to hang his hat. But, at the end of the day, he doesn't need to be in the legislature this fall. That is not a pressing concern. They have many, many talented people in their caucus who can press the fight to the government and point out their foibles and mistakes. And he can kind of do his business outside and really sort of prepare for his grand entrance into the legislature and into Alberta politics, provincial politics next spring, I think.
Do you think these developments, I want to take a look at Jagmeet Singh, I don't know what metaphor do you want to use, rattling his sabre, dropping the gauntlet, throwing a hand grenade, whatever you want to use. How do you characterize what he did last week? Johnny and I are sitting here, it's after a show, we're kind of working on some stuff, and then all of a sudden this video drops. It wasn't at a news conference. It wasn't in front of microphones. It was obviously a pre-produced video. Jagmeet Singh releases it, and he basically says, Justin Trudeau can't be trusted. Corporate greed, acting in the best interest of big corporations. We're ripping up our agreement. But then this definitely doesn't kind of sort of maybe mean that there's going to be an early election and everybody's going, okay, well then what's the point of all this? What do you make of what went down last week?
I think it was a wonderful metaphor for Jagmeet Singh's leadership. which has been, to be clear, not good. Like you have an opportunity to really kind of shake up the landscape in Canadian politics, make a statement, maybe win voters that are bleeding to the Liberals. Because let's be clear, while the Liberal poll numbers have collapsed, the NDP's poll numbers are basically flatlining. They haven't changed at all, and that's because they're losing votes, to the Conservatives, and they're picking up the odd sort of Liberal vote here and there to stanch the bleeding. But he could have, in a way, repaid the Liberals for what they did to the NDP in 2015, where the Liberals outflanked the NDP, became the sort of the de facto progressive choice after the NDP had led in the polling for years and won the election. He could have done the same thing to the Liberals here. Instead, he comes out with this video, which just looks sort of inherently weak, like you're not going to actually stand up and answer questions, and then says, "But we'll still probably vote with them anyways." It just looked weak. It looked kind of half-hearted and unstrategic. And if you're a New Democrat right now, you kind of have to be a little bit depressed by all this, because this should be your moment to shine. We have an issue set right now where Canadians are more open, I think, to progressive ideas than ever. There was some really interesting polling recently from Abacus that talked about which issues are Canadians most supportive of, and it was things like taxing the 1%, free public transit, free post-secondary education. I'm not saying those are necessarily good ideas, but they're ideas that Canadians are disproportionately open to. And you have this moment where the NDP could kind of really push the Liberals back into third place. And this is the best they can do. So, we talk a lot in the sort of pundit class about how the Liberals need a new leader. I don't think anyone needs a new leader more badly or desperately in federal politics than the NDP.
Yeah, I guess like part of me can see, if you're on Team Jagmeet, if you're Mr. Singh himself, and you're going, listen, we've had several shots at sort of momentum. We've had our opportunities. We haven't necessarily capitalized on them. And then they see, not necessarily, and we pointed this out in a show last week, encourage people to check it out, some Angus Reid polling, that, we took a look at the party momentum, all three of them, the big ones, over the past few years. And, you look at where the Conservatives were, and they're up, I think, off the top of my head, about 8 points from where they were when we looked at the benchmark. The Liberals were down like 12 points or whatever it was, and you could see that kind of crossover that happened, right around the time that Pierre Poilievre won the leadership-ish. And then the NDP had held steady, which I guess if you're an optimist, you go holding steady at 19 points, never below 18 points, never above 21. There's something to be said for holding steady, but there's also something discouraging about that. If you're an entrepreneur and your business never grows, that's not always a good thing. So maybe they look at this and they say, the NDP's polling at 19% of support among decided or leaning voters. The Liberals are at 21, which might as well be the same thing. So then maybe they're looking at this and saying, Trudeau's ripe for the picking. Like, this is finally the time that we're going to move into that number 2 slot. And then once we're in the number 2 slot, then we're perceived as Poilievre versus us, or we're the ones that can stop the Conservatives. But me, like, as I look at this, I look at that steadiness of like 19% holding steady forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And I go, you've tried this, you've tried that, you've tried the other. You kind of sort of got dental care in for low-income Canadians. There's been a bit more of a conversation around pharmacare, nothing major. I know the Liberals are trying to do some stuff to address the housing crunch. I wouldn't necessarily pin that on their alliance with the NDP. I think that's just an obvious priority for them. But I just don't understand how there can be a belief there, if there actually is, that video is all it's going to take to convince like 8 or 9 million Canadians to change their minds on who they're going to vote for next. Now, I'm not just saying he should give up, but I just thought it was a strange one, because he's essentially said Justin Trudeau can't be trusted. And then in my mind now, it's either you got to dump him and call an early election, trigger an early election by voting non-confidence, or you can't say that stuff in the first place if you're going to keep supporting that government, right? It just seems like a bizarre strategic. It doesn't seem like there's any strategy to the move at all, to be honest with you.
I don't think there was. And that's sort of I think that speaks volumes about the challenges with the NDP's leadership. If you were, an NDP strategist going into the, August, you would have circled the 2 by-elections that are coming up on your calendar, the one in Winnipeg and the one in Montreal, and said, if we win both of these, and they very much can, the Winnipeg seat is an old NDP seat, it's Daniel Blakey's old seat, and then the Montreal seat, they're right in the thick of it. They have a good candidate. You'd circle that and say, we win these 2 seats, and then we trigger the downfall of the government and call an election, right? That's our move. That's how we pay the Liberals back for what they did to us in 2015. That would be the strong move. But what looks like happened was Pierre Poilievre got out on the digital hustings and started calling Jagmeet a sellout. And then he decided to agree with that statement basically and pull the plug only in name, right? Like you don't look strong by having someone taunt you for a thing and then doing the thing, right? It's an inherently weak position to be dealing from. And it makes Pierre Poilievre look, again, like he's the one calling the numbers. He's the one calling the shots. And it makes the NDP look like all they can do is kind of respond and react rather than be proactive. And, when the Liberals outflanked them in 2015, it was because they made a bold decision. The NDP was out there saying, we'll never run deficits. We're not going to do the thing you think we will. And the Liberals said, we'll run deficits. We'll gladly run deficits to make your life better. And that switched the whole election up. They need to find a similar kind of way of overturning the table in Canadian politics. And it's not going to be by talking more about corporate greed. It's not going to be more by talking about how untrustworthy Justin Trudeau is. They have to find a way to change the perception that Canadians have of them as a party in a way that meets their concerns. And I just don't see that coming out of the NDP right now.
Yeah, me neither. James in the live chat on YouTube says, if anything, Singh just strengthened Trudeau's hand. I'm not sure. There's a bit of a mess happening right now in Ottawa. I'm not sure if you saw this report just this morning from Fife and Walsh, that dynamic duo at the Globe and Mail, senior political reporters out of Ottawa. 5 chiefs of staff set to leave the Trudeau government. 5 of the 38 ministries losing their chiefs of staff. Optically, that's a tough one to manage. Is there a way? Can you find a ray of sunshine here? Can you find a way to spin it where James might be right, that Trudeau's hand is strengthened by what the NDP's just tried to pull off?
I really can't, simply because it doesn't seem like the Liberals right now have the political musculature to do anything other than, tread water. There was a story last week about how their national director was going to resign, and Katie Telford, the chief of staff, came out and said, the reporter who was reporting it didn't have good sources. Turned out she did have good sources. And if they can't even keep a handle on something, as simple as internal HR issues, how exactly are they going to conduct a successful and effective election campaign? They really kind of seem like they're in the death throes right now. So I think they're lucky in the sense that Jagmeet could have gone for the jugular and he completely and utterly missed. But that's not the same thing as them having a stronger hand right now. I think both the NDP and the Liberals right now have an incredibly weak hand. And I think that's what's so frustrating for progressives in this country is you look at both of the sort of major options, and neither one of them are putting forward even their C+ game right now.
Yeah, what are you expecting to see from the Liberals over the next couple of months? Like you start getting into, if there's going to be an early election triggered, like anything could happen. I'm not convinced even 1% that the NDP is actually prepared to go into an early election. It's one of those things where you pick a fight and then all of a sudden the fight's happening and you're like, uh-oh. Like we've seen it in hockey a couple times where a guy drops his gloves thinking that the linesmen are going to jump in and then they don't, and then you find yourself actually chucking knucks, and it doesn't always wind up in a good way. But of course, it could be an early election, in which case, undeniably, there's no time for a leadership change. Doesn't matter. Justin Trudeau will lead the Liberals in. He's told us on this show that he intends on doing it. He's reiterated that several times since, but it's not a guarantee. Crazier things have happened in politics, but if something is going to happen with the governing Liberals right now, it's got to happen relatively soon, right? You get to a point where you can't put in, I guess maybe except for Kamala Harris, but you typically don't put somebody in 6 or 8 weeks out from an election.
Yeah. I'll give you 3 options, and I'm not sure which one I would put my money on right now as far as how it'll go. First option is that Trudeau calls a snap election. If he's genuinely interested in protecting sort of the Liberal Party's longer term prospects, you absolutely have to keep the NDP from becoming the de facto progressive choice. You have to prevent them from moving ahead of you into second place. And the way you do that, I think, is by calling an election right now, because the NDP has no money. They have provincial elections in BC, Saskatchewan, where they have a lot of their key personnel in the field. You could really trap Jagmeet Singh and put them down to maybe 10 or 15 seats. And then at least, obviously Pierre Poilievre is the prime minister. That is not a good outcome, but you are still the de facto progressive alternative. So that's option A. Option B is Trudeau steps down and someone else takes the reins. And I understand the argument against that. I don't think it exists anymore. It has any credibility anymore. People are just done with him. They are done. They don't want to consider him in the same way. And I made this comparison at the time when Biden stepped down and people yelled at me. But I was right then and I'm right now. People are just tired of Trudeau. They don't want to vote for him. And so, the way that a lot of Democrats were like Biden, how is he that much better than Trump? They're both old men. As soon as you gave them a choice, a real choice, all the enthusiasm flooded back into the party. And I think the same would be true with the Liberals. You have to remember, people didn't think that Kamala Harris was going to be a strong, exciting, dynamic candidate right up until the second that she was. So, yeah, Chrystia Freeland has her, the concerns that people have about her ability to relate to the public. Yeah, Anita Anand maybe isn't that exciting. Yeah, Mark Carney is, an out-of-touch elite, but we don't know until we expose them to the sort of reality of being the leader of the party. And who knows, maybe Canadians will rally to them. At the very least, it seems hard for them to do any worse than Trudeau's doing right now in terms of personal popularity.
Yeah.
And then the third option is that Trudeau runs this thing all the way to the end, and I mean all the way to the end. So he doesn't have to call an election next fall. He could theoretically, and again, this is if he can get the NDP to go with him, and that doesn't seem likely anymore, but he could go 5 years. And because that is in the Constitution, you can have a government go the full 5-year term, and he could wait for inflation to keep coming down, interest rates to keep coming down, the American election to settle. And maybe by then, all the concerns that people have around, immigration, cost of living, maybe those have calmed a little bit. I think that is, again, vanishingly unlikely, I think, now with the NDP leaving the agreement, but that is a possibility. So maybe I'll handicap that one as the least likely outcome, but the other two, I don't know which one is the most likely.
Yeah. And you didn't even mention the opportunity to wait for his biggest political threat, that is the surging Conservatives led by Pierre Poilievre, to implode as well. That's happened too, right? It's not a good strategy to hope and pray that your opponent implodes. And I think that Pierre Poilievre has done a pretty good job of, behaving himself. It feels like he's got nothing to win right now by going full guns blazing, but he has his strategy. He's talking about axing the tax. He's driving that home with everybody. But Pierre Poilievre has been on his best behavior through the summer, as far as I can tell. Nothing outrageous, right? That's got to be planned.
It's just funny that even his best behavior can be so deeply annoying sometimes. But no, that has been the Liberal strategy. I can tell you that as a fact. It's been wait him out. He will self-destruct, and he hasn't, and he's not going to.
Yep.
They have a discipline that they didn't have before. He is clearly very disciplined on a lot of this stuff. And in a weird way, I think the theory was the longer Canadians are exposed to him, the less they're going to like him. It's the opposite. The longer Canadians are exposed to him, not the more they like him, but the more they're less fearful of him. They're like, okay, this guy's, what's the big deal here? Yeah, he's a bit of a jerk, but he's not Donald Trump. And I know they keep trying to make that comparison stick, and I just don't think it's going to work. If it was going to stick, it would have stuck by now. And so hoping that he says something that is so explosively terrible that the electorate turns on him, I mean, that's a strategy. But if you want to compare the guy to Trump, look at Trump. Trump has said some of the most offensive, outrageous, terrible things over the last 6+ years, and it hasn't changed anything. People haven't walked away from him. So the idea that in this day and age, a politician can say something that is so instantly and immediately disqualifying, I don't think it holds, at least among Conservatives.
Jillian in our live chat says Jagmeet just never seemed like much of a leader. He stood out of the pack due to a viral video where he behaved in a weak way when a racist confronted him, but it wound up making racists feel comfortable, says Jillian. So that's her take on it. Let's not rule out the Bloc Quebecois here. Kind of an interesting scenario. That party, its leader, Mr. Blanchet, describing this as a window of opportunity. The BQ is at its caucus retreat starting, as a matter of fact, the day that we're talking here, Max, in Quebec. And they've already kind of made public a list of, I don't know if you want to call it demands, conditions, whatever it is, they can enter the mix here. They can enter the fray. They can make this interesting, but they say they will only do so if it's beneficial for Quebec. People will say, you mean more beneficial for Quebec? People are going to start to light their hair on fire in Western Canada, but there would be pension implications. There'd be immigration implications, some talk about temporary foreign workers, et cetera, et cetera. Can you see a world where this happens?
Absolutely, I can. They have more seats than the NDP.
Yeah.
I think people forget that it is not just the Liberals and the NDP preventing the Conservatives from forming power. It's, this is the minority parliament, and the Liberals could have chosen to dance with the Bloc Quebecois if they wanted to. Understandable why they didn't, but now they may have to. And especially for the Liberals who are way down in the polls in Quebec, they may be reorienting a lot of their energy, or a lot more of their energy, towards Quebec and towards keeping Quebecers happy. And yeah, I'm sure that's frustrating as hell for Albertans. And my advice to them has always been, stop reflexively electing Conservatives here, political attention than you do. I wrote a piece for Maclean's back in the day that, the way for Albertans to get more respect in Ottawa is to vote like Quebecers do, which is to change your votes depending on the election and the circumstances. I'm not holding my breath for that to happen, but this is probably bad news for the the prospect of keeping Alberta separatism kind of at a low boil, because this is going to be genuinely, and I think legitimately, upsetting to watch the federal government led by a prime minister named Trudeau once again kind of bend over backwards to accommodate Quebec's needs.
You can read Max Fawcett's work at nationalobserver.com. That's where he's the lead columnist. And make sure you give him a follow on Twitter as well, at Max Fawcett. Always enjoy the opportunity to connect, buddy. I hope that you had you had kind of like a soft sabbatical going. Not that you weren't doing anything, but you took some time off to write through the summer, et cetera, and now you're back at it with the National Observer.
Yeah, the last week was my first week back, and I got to take a few weeks off this summer, and I didn't stay off Twitter entirely, but I did get to recharge and spend time with the family and think about some longer projects. So it was, it was a very, very good decision, and would highly recommend anyone else, if they can find a way to scrimp and save so they can have a sabbatical, do it. You won't regret it.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, before you go, I should ask you typically have something. I love the Fawcett Easter eggs. There's usually something in the background or something introduced to sort of give a little something to our audience that tunes in and watches on YouTube. You've had the Karl Marx framed photo. I remember, I think it was the Raki Pancholi coffee mug that you were using. I see a ball cap behind you. Does it say emissions on it? Is that the Easter egg today? What are we seeing behind us in the ball cap?
Yeah, that's my emissions cap. Which is a little it's an inside joke from some emissions caps were produced at COP, and I managed to get my hands on one of them. And it's a fun little thing. I should point out because we're talking about Russian influenced people here. The Karl Marx coaster sits on top of a copy of Timothy Snyder's On Liberty. It is not what the conservative trolls in my mentions like to imagine it is. It's actually a reminder of the flaws in the Marxist view.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen much more egregious expressions. I remember once an entire province horrified when a political leader showed up wearing a Che Guevara swatch. You remember the Che watch? That set
such outrage. Yeah.
That gave people years of venom to spit. Thanks for doing this, buddy. Always appreciate it, and we'll chat with you again sometime soon.
Anytime.
You got it. That's Max Fawcett, lead columnist at Canada's National Observer. The emissions cap. That's clever. That's like a pretty solid dad joke right there. I guess if you introduce some cards, you could have the cap and trade, which might kind of work for some people.
The best part of all of this, if you go back in the show, and I know people will now, is that it was situated. It's situated right above his head. Like it looks like he's
pretty good.
Kind of wearing it.
And it's never an accident. Like he always, and like I remember when he was when he was like drinking from his Raki coffee mug. I'm trying to remember. Was it before? It must have been before she withdrew from the leadership race for the Alberta NDP, but he kind of had this smile, like this smirk every time he'd raise his mug to his lips to take a sip of his coffee. You got to be on your toes when you're talking to Max every single time. Again, that's nationalobserver.com. Johnny and I want to tell you about something pretty awesome that went on this weekend. We have a praise report, as we'd call it, but first I do want to remind you as well how grateful we are to partner with amazing friends like the team at Friesen Brothers, and they've got a whole bunch going on right now, but if you check out their website, one thing I want to draw your attention to in particular is the new Friesen Order Ahead app. So you go to Friesen.com, that's Freson. You can download the app directly from the website. It makes life a whole lot easier to pick up online orders. You can conveniently order things like Friesen Brothers party trays and then pick them up. Let them do the catering for you, right? From the Rabbit Hill location in Edmonton, Glenora, Fort Saskatchewan, or the Stony Plains store, and there's more to come on that. You can find out all the information, find the app itself on the website. And again, thanks to everybody, every single one of you that made a donation at the till at Friesen Brothers. They were proud to match it up to $50,000. Together, all of you raised $149,275, 150 G's for the Jasper Volunteer Fire Brigade. You can find out more about where that donation is going on their website. And the team at Complete Care Restoration wants to remind you that they are ready to respond 24/7 if disaster strikes in your community. Remember that name. That's Complete Care Restoration at CompleteCareRestoration.ca. For more than 25 years, they've been restoring properties, rebuilding peace of mind, and they're ready to respond 24/7 with emergency services available. This is a team that has the training, the certification, and of course the track record. They built our studio. We've told you that many times. We're proud to recommend Complete Care Restoration. Ben likes my years of venom to spit. He says that worked well. That's Ben in the chat. Always love seeing everybody that's waking up with us, joining us live streaming on YouTube every morning at 8:30 Mountain, 10:30 Eastern, or of course on the Mixlr live streaming audio app. Shout out to those of you that stream us on Mixlr, presented by California Closets. That's where I think most of our audience members that are in the Teslas and the fancy new cars that have the apps on the dash, they're all downloading Mixlr, and that's where they're catching the show. I'm going to roll right into positive reflections here because you and I want to talk about something, but I think it just makes perfect sense for this to be our positive reflection of the week. So why don't we roll it, Johnny? This, presented by our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy, the first episode of every week, is our chance to remind you that there are wonderful things in the world around us. This is where we harness positive energy and renew our faith in humanity, courtesy of our friends at Kuby. And Johnny, we just wanted to give a shout out to everybody that joined us this weekend. It was Saturday night, downtown Edmonton, as we, of course, raised money via this Jasper Wildfire Benefit Concert. Kyle McKierney was there, Nice Horse was there, and the Prairie States brought us home, kind of headlining this whole show. Downtown Edmonton, 30 degrees, the river valley behind us, absolutely beautiful.
It was incredible.
And it was so good having you there too, my man. I tweeted about you. I called you the professional vibe manager. And I thought that you did such a great job ahead of and then between sets as well. Really, really great to see so many real talkers coming up and saying hello, all for a great cause. And there was one story in particular that we wanted to share with you. This was really kind of like a gut punch of a story, but it ended up being a really wonderful story. It's kind of still a developing story. But the gals of Nice Horse, and by the way, one of my new favorite bands, I'll got to be honest, Nice Horse was not on my radar until we started promoting this concert. You got to check out Nice Horse. Make sure you subscribe to them on Spotify or wherever you get your music. But this band, my friends, this band found out literally hours before the show, the night before the show, that their storage locker in Calgary had been robbed. It had been burgled, and they lost $40,000 worth of gear. Let's be clear, they didn't lose it. Some asshole stole it. $40,000 worth of gear. But you know what they did? They got in touch with the Prairie States, who promised to lend them some gear. They got onto an airplane, they made their way up to Edmonton, and they honored their commitment to play that benefit concert for the people of Jasper. Using all borrowed gear, using all borrowed equipment. As a musician, that'd be a big deal, right?
Oh, huge.
You're playing other guitars, you're playing gear you're not used to playing.
Yeah.
But a shout out to Nice Horse for showing up and making that happen. You didn't hear, they weren't even going to say anything until we said something from the stage, but I just wanted to give them a huge shout out as well. And to everybody that was there, we are thrilled. We had an on-the-fly live auction, courtesy of our friends at WestJet, who at the very last moment gave us a couple of airline tickets, fly anywhere round trip tickets to auction off. Somebody in the crowd just ponied up $4,000 to add to that fundraising total. And Real Talkers, thanks to you, those of you that joined us, plus our friends at ATB and Edmonton International Airport. There were a ton of wonderful groups. We had some Jasper Town councilors in the house. Our friends at Tourism Jasper were there. $255,400 raised at that show. Just unbelievable.
Incredible.
And once Johnny gets
$250,000, man.
You know, once you get paid for that, we'll have 10,000 left for the people of. But hey, thanks for volunteering your time, Johnny, for that, and everybody else that did as well. $255,000 going to the Jasper Community Team Society. You can learn more about them online. We'll put their link in the website. That's who we recommend you make a donation to if you're looking to help out the people of Jasper. But again, to everybody that made that happen, Aaron Clyde at Foundry Events, James Jackson at EIA, and everybody else that lent a hand their support, all of the corporate sponsors, and those of you that bought those $20 tickets to come rock out with us, thank you so much on behalf of our friends in Jasper. We can't wait to deliver more good news about more of those tourism operators opening up, more of those businesses ready to welcome you back. It might not be that far out, and we can't wait to make those announcements, but that doesn't happen without your support. So thank you, Real Talkers, from the bottom of our hearts. Positive Reflections is presented by Kuby Renewable Energy. You can get a free solar quote right now by visiting kubyenergy.ca. Coming up on the 11th of September, that is tomorrow's, no, it's the 10th of September. That's tomorrow's show. We're going to be joined by Councillor Andrew Knack out of the city of Edmonton. He's got a big announcement, and he's going to make it on Real Talk. And then on the 11th, we're doing something a little different for a Real Talk Roundtable, welcoming in 3 nominees for the CCMAs. As our city plays host to the Canadian Country Music Awards, we're going to have a lot of fun around the Real Talk Roundtable. That's what's coming up next on Real Talk. Thanks for telling your friends about what we're doing here, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Kandola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.